My name is Alara Vance, and for 20 years, I believed that caring for my second husband, Arthur, was the quiet, steady rhythm of my life. It was a purpose I had stepped into willingly, a series of duties, the laundry folded just so, the meals timed to his particular appetites, the long, silent hours in waiting rooms that I accepted as the architecture of a committed partnership. I sat by his side through every hospital stay, my hand a constant, warm presence on his, a silent promise that he was not alone. I thought this was simply what a wife did. It was a role I played with a quiet, unassuming devotion. Until that one gray afternoon, in the sterile, whispering corridor of St. Jude's Hospital, when I overheard him speaking to the man from the adjacent room. "She's a godsend, really," Arthur said, his voice carrying a note of smug satisfaction I had rarely heard. "It's like having a free caregiver, you know? Handles everything. And when I'm gone, of course, the estate goes to my boy, Leo. It's only right." In that moment, the entire foundation of my life seemed to dissolve into dust. I wasn't protecting a marriage, I had been meticulously managed in a transaction. For 2 decades, I had been a feature of his life, a convenient appliance. And as the truth settled into my bones, a cold, hard resolve began to form. I was not a victim. I was a woman who had finally been handed the truth. And with that truth, I would not seek revenge. I would seek a reckoning of the soul, a reclamation of the woman I had allowed to disappear. I sat in that unforgiving vinyl chair beside his hospital bed, a cup of long cold tea still clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. Arthur lay under the thin hospital blanket, the rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor a maddeningly steady metronome. The doctors called it a minor cardiac event, a warning shot. They assured me he would recover fully, that we'd caught it in time. But something in him had already shifted. He had become more demanding, his dependence a heavy cloak he wore with an air of entitlement. I was the one who helped him sit up, who coaxed spoonfuls of lukewarm broth past his lips, who gently wiped his brow. Every few hours, even when my own spine ached with a dull, persistent fire, I would be there to adjust his pillows or massage his calves to keep the circulation moving. The nurses would pass by, their voices soft with admiration. "You're such a wonderful wife, Alara. We don't see devotion like this anymore." I would offer a tired smile, a faint nod. I had heard those words so many times they had become part of the ambient noise of my life, as familiar and as meaningless as the hum of the refrigerator at home. These were my duties, tasks I performed with a muscle memory so deep, I could no longer recall what personal dreams or ambitions I had set aside to make room for them. Visitors weren't permitted overnight in the cardiac unit, so my days began before dawn. That morning, the lights of the nurses' station cast long, lonely shadows down the hallway. I carried a small thermos of coffee and a paper bag containing a still-warm bran muffin from a local bakery he liked. The air was thick with the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic, a smell that had become synonymous with my life with Arthur. I set the bag on his bedside table, but the bed was empty, the sheets turned down with crisp, institutional precision. A nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, noticed my confusion. "Your husband is in the solarium, dear," she said, gesturing down the hall. "He said he needed some morning sun." A flicker of warmth went through me. I imagined us sitting together, the soft light on our faces, a moment of shared peace. I quickened my pace, my shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum, and rounded the corner into the glass-walled room. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was in a wheelchair, parked near a large potted fern, speaking animatedly with a younger man, another patient I recognized from the ward. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop. I simply froze, rooted to the spot by the tone of his voice. It was a voice I didn't recognize, brash, boastful, stripped of the gentle frailty he reserved for me. "You have to be smart about these things," Arthur was saying with a low chuckle. "I'm in my 60s, and I land a second wife who's younger, healthier. Doesn't cost me a thing. She cooks, she cleans, she does all the hospital runs. Alara just takes care of it all." He let out a lazy, self-satisfied sigh. "A live-in caretaker who thinks it's love. Can't beat that deal." I stood there, the warm muffin in the bag suddenly feeling like a stone in my hand. His voice wasn't loud, but each word was a physical blow, landing with a sickening thud in the pit of my stomach. "She thinks we have this great partnership," he went on, a sneer coloring his words. "But I've had the trust drawn up for years. When I kick the bucket, everything goes to my blood. Leo's a bit of a mess, but he's my son. As for Alara, she can go live with her daughter. Not my problem anymore." The other man offered a short, complicit laugh. It felt as if a tectonic plate had shifted deep within me. A wave of nausea rose in my throat, hot and acidic. My eyes burned, but no tears came. I couldn't let him see me. I couldn't let him know I had heard. I took a silent step back, then another, my movements weightless, ghostly. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. A gurney rattled past, its wheels shrieking, the sound of physical manifestation of the scream trapped in my chest. I leaned against the cool wall, closing my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. For 20 years, I had believed I was building a life, a shared history, a safe harbor for our final years. But to him, I was just a convenience. A utility. And the deepest cut of all was this: I had given everything so freely. I never saw his needs as a burden. I cared for him because I chose to, because I believed it was the right and loving thing to do. Even when my own body protested, even when his son treated me with a cool, persistent disdain, I never complained. I gave and I gave and I gave. And now I knew that my kindness, my sacrifice, had been nothing more than fuel for his private joke, his secret victory. I was a character in his story he could boast about, a testament to his cleverness. When I returned to his room, he was back in bed, looking up at me with a placid smile. "Ah, there you are. Did you get the muffin? You really shouldn't tire yourself out like this. I was just telling that fellow downstairs that you're the one person in this world I can always count on." I looked at him, my face a carefully constructed mask. That phrase, "the one I can count on," now sounded like the one who is most obedient. I said nothing, but in the quiet, desolate chambers of my heart, I marked this moment. Not as a moment of breakage, but as the moment I finally, irrevocably, woke up. I was still alive. And that meant I still had a choice. When I returned to the house that afternoon, I didn't turn on the lights. It was a rare, sun-drenched day in Cedar Creek, the kind that usually made the moss on the old oak trees gleam like emeralds. But inside, the house felt damp and cold, heavy with a history that was not my own. I curled up on the sofa in the living room, my arms wrapped tightly around my waist, and sat in the gloom, trying to trace the path back to the moment I had started to become invisible. This house was never my choice. It had been Arthur's family home, passed down from his parents. When we married, he had flatly refused to move. "Leo grew up here," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "It's his home. A new place would be too disruptive for him." At the time, Leo was 15, a lanky teenager with a permanent sneer and eyes that slid past me as if I were a piece of furniture. He never called me by my name, and when he had to, the word Alara sounded like an inconvenience on his tongue. But I had agreed. I moved my life, 2 boxes of poetry books, my grandmother's cast-iron skillet, and a quiet sense of hope, into the echo of someone else's past. I thought if I was kind enough, patient enough, I could earn my place. I spent the first 3 months of our marriage on my hands and knees, scrubbing years of accumulated grime from the kitchen grout. I was working part-time at the university library then, and every evening, I would stop for groceries on my way home, carefully planning meals I knew Arthur and Leo preferred. I remember our first Thanksgiving together. I'd spent 2 full days poring over recipes, determined to roast the perfect turkey. 5 minutes after I'd set the magnificent, golden-brown bird on the table, Leo, without looking up from his phone, mumbled, "The gravy's weird." My grandmother's was better. I said nothing. I just cleared his plate when he was done, my smile fixed and brittle. In that moment, I told myself that patience was a virtue, that love was built on such small, silent sacrifices. Looking back, that was the first crack in the foundation. The first time I understood that this house would never truly be mine. I stood by Arthur when he was laid off from his managerial position, navigating the bewildering paperwork for his severance and retirement. After his first wife, who had left him years before we met, passed away from a sudden illness, he had wept openly for her, and I had simply brewed him chamomile tea, patting his shoulder, never once pointing out the irony. When Leo dropped out of community college with thousands in credit card debt, I used a portion of my own modest inheritance from my parents to pay it off, just so Arthur wouldn't have to dip into his retirement funds. I tried so hard to belong. I feigned an interest in the historical society meetings he attended. I learned to nod politely at their inside jokes, and I grew accustomed to the sting of being overlooked at family functions. Once, at his cousin's wedding, Arthur introduced me to a distant relative as, "This is Alara, a dear friend of the family." I stood there, clutching my wine glass, a smiling extra in a scene where my character had no lines. That night, I cried in the car on the way home, silently, so he wouldn't notice. Then I went inside and made us both a late-night snack, as if nothing had happened. I had convinced myself that this was what mature love looked like. It wasn't about passion or grand gestures, it was about companionship, compromise, and a quiet, enduring grace. We were not young lovers. Remarriage came with baggage, with ghosts. I told myself I didn't need romance, only a partner to grow old with, a hand to hold in the dark. But now I knew. It wasn't partnership. It was exploitation. The moment I heard Arthur call me a free caregiver, every act of tolerance, every swallowed hurt, every quiet compromise I had ever made, came crashing down around me like a building collapsing in on itself. And I had to ask myself, for 20 years, who was truly being cared for? As I sat there, lost in the shadows of the past, the doorbell chimed. I smoothed my hair, took a deep breath to compose my features, and opened the door. It was Leo. He was wearing a rumpled sweatshirt, his hands jammed in his pockets, a familiar air of restless entitlement about him. The faint smell of stale smoke and unwashed laundry clung to him. He brushed past me without a word and went straight to the refrigerator. "Where's Dad?" he asked, his voice muffled as he rummaged inside. "The doctor said it's nothing serious, right? He told me to come by and pick up some of his things." My voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "He's still in the hospital. You should go see him if you have a moment." Leo shrugged, his disinterest palpable. He pulled out a can of soda and popped the top. "I told him he needs to get his affairs in order. No point leaving a mess for me to clean up later." He ambled over to the dining table and slouched into a chair, taking a long, noisy sip. He looked at me then, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't take it personally. It's not like any of this was ever going to be yours anyway." I didn't answer. But in that instant, a heavy, iron door slammed shut deep inside me. I was done. I was done trying to earn his affection. I was done pretending to be a benevolent stepmother. I was done with the fantasy that this house could ever be my home. It wasn't, and it was never meant to be. I reached over and flicked off the main kitchen light, leaving the room in a dim, amber glow from a small corner lamp. Leo squinted in the sudden darkness, but I offered no explanation. The quiet shadows felt like an ally, a space where I could finally begin to see. The day Arthur was discharged, the sunlight felt almost accusatory in its brilliance. As a nurse wheeled him toward the automatic doors of the hospital entrance, he beamed. "It feels good to be going home," he said, patting my hand. I smiled back, a hollow gesture that didn't reach my eyes. The word home now felt foreign on my tongue. That house, my residence for 2 decades, felt like a borrowed room in a stranger's inn. I helped him into the passenger seat of the car. He immediately began to complain that the seat was too stiff, the angle all wrong. I said nothing, just buckled his seatbelt and closed the door. As we drove, I watched him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were closed, his head tilted back against the headrest, the very picture of an aging king expecting his court to attend him. When we arrived, I performed my familiar duties. I poured him a glass of iced water, I plumped the pillows on the sofa, I laid his favorite cashmere throw over his legs. He settled in, flicked on the television to a news channel, and asked me to fetch his reading glasses. His routine resumed without a single crack in its surface. There was no apology, no sign of guilt, as if his cruel words in the solarium had been nothing more than a passing dream. But I knew. Everything had changed. A few days later, I began to sort through the mountain of hospital bills and insurance statements. I sat in Arthur's study, a room I had always found oppressive with its dark wood and leather-bound books he never read. I opened the heavy, gray filing cabinet, a monolith of organized control. His system was meticulous. Blue folders for medical, red for financial, yellow for investments and insurance. As I was refiling a claim, a single sheet of paper slipped from the yellow folder and fluttered to the floor. I bent to retrieve it. It was a copy of the declaration page for his will and trust. I scanned the page, my eyes searching for my own name. There it was, in stark, unforgiving print. Primary beneficiary, the Leo Sterling Trust. Alternate beneficiary, the Cedar Creek Historical Society. My name wasn't there. Not as a secondary, not as a tertiary, not even as a footnote. I sank into the leather chair, the paper trembling in my hand. It wasn't about the money. I had my own small savings, a relic from my life before Arthur. It was about the erasure. After 20 years of shared life, I had assumed my name would at least be present, a line on a page that acknowledged my existence, my role, my presence. But I was not in his future, not even in his legacy. I had proofread his work emails, I had nursed him through a painful bout of shingles, I had planned his 60th birthday party down to the last detail. And all of it, every gesture, was a performance for an audience of one who had already written me out of the script. I slipped the document back into the folder, my movements precise and silent. That evening, I made pasta for dinner. He took one bite and scowled. "Something's different," he muttered. "It doesn't taste right." "I used a different brand of sauce," I replied, my voice flat. "Well, I don't like it," he said, pushing his plate away slightly. "You know I'm particular about the sauce." He looked at me, his brow furrowed. "You've been quiet lately, Alara." Distant. I met his gaze across the table, my own expression unreadable. "Perhaps," I said, my voice as calm as a still lake. "Perhaps I'm just seeing things more clearly." He stared at me for a long moment, waiting for an explanation that I had no intention of giving. After dinner, he retreated to his recliner, remote in hand, and promptly fell asleep. I sat in the armchair opposite him, a book open on my lap, its pages unturned. My mind circled a single, relentless question. How do you continue to care for someone who has systematically, deliberately, written you out of their life? For 20 years, I had thought I was a partner in a marriage. Now, I saw it was an unwritten employment contract. I had been compensated with vague affection, my salary paid in pats on the hand, my severance package a legacy of silence. This wasn't love. It was a long, polite, and deeply personal form of exploitation. And I had been a willing participant. I closed the book, stood up, and went into the kitchen. I washed the dishes slowly, methodically. As I dried my hands, I rested them on the cool granite countertop and closed my eyes. A voice, quiet but unshakably firm, rose from the deepest part of me. "It's time, Alara. It is time to choose yourself." 2 days later, my hand shaking slightly, I dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before a voice, warm and earthy as freshly turned soil, answered. "Earth and hand pottery, this is Isabel." "Isabel," I managed, my throat tight. "It's Alara." "Alara. Honey, I was just thinking about you." I'm up to my elbows in clay, trying to center this stubborn lump. There was a pause. She knew my voice, the subtle frequencies of my emotions. Her tone shifted instantly, becoming gentle but serious. "What is it? What's wrong? Can I come over? I need to talk." "You don't even have to ask," she said, her voice a lifeline. "The kettle's on. I'll be waiting." I hung up, grabbed my purse and keys, and walked out of the house without a backward glance. 30 minutes later, I was standing in front of her studio, a cozy, rustic building set back from the road. A hand-painted sign swung gently in the breeze. "Earth and Hand. Reshape your world." The moment I stepped inside, enveloped by the scent of damp clay and wood smoke, Isabel wrapped me in a fierce, grounding hug. I felt something inside me finally begin to crack. She led me to a small sitting area in the back, past rows of unfired pots and sculptures, and handed me a steaming mug of peppermint tea. I sat there, staring at the delicate, hand-thrown mug, and the words tumbled out. I told her everything. The conversation in the solarium, the trust document, Leo's casual cruelty, Arthur's oblivious entitlement. My voice dropped to a whisper as I confessed the deepest shame. I thought he was just old-fashioned. A little selfish, maybe. I never realized he didn't see me as his partner at all. Isabel listened, her gaze steady and unwavering. When I finally fell silent, she spoke, her voice clear and sharp as a sculpting tool. Ilara, he didn't see you as his partner because he never saw you as a person. He saw you as a function. A resource. I looked at her, stunned by the starkness of her words. You're not his wife, she continued, her eyes holding mine. You're his unpaid, live-in health aide. Full-time, no benefits. She paused, letting the words sink in. You need to wake up. I'm 60 years old, Isabel, I whispered, the words tasting like defeat. Where would I even go? What would I do? She cut me off, her tone gentle but firm. You come here. The apartment upstairs is empty. The last tenant moved out a month ago. You can stay as long as you need. Or you go to your daughter. You have options. You just have to be brave enough to see them. She leaned forward. Listen to me. You know how I got out of my marriage? My ex cheated on me with his paralegal. I was 30, with a toddler, a mountain of debt, and everyone telling me to make it work for the sake of the child. You know what I told them? I shook my head, mesmerized by her strength. She looked me dead in the eye. I said I would rather live on ramen noodles for the rest of my life than spend one more day pretending a man who didn't respect me was worthy of my dignity. A laugh escaped me then, a real, unburdened laugh, the first in what felt like an eternity. She patted my hand. You're not weak, Ilara. You're just kind. You've been so kind for so long that you forgot to be kind to yourself. I lowered my head, my eyes finally stinging with tears. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I felt a small fissure in the immense weight that had been pressing down on my chest. We sat there for hours, talking. Before I left, as the afternoon sun began to dip below the tall pine trees, she said something I would never forget. You are not a woman being abandoned in her old age, she said. You are a woman who is finally choosing to reclaim her own life. When I walked out of that studio, I felt a shift in the very ground beneath my feet. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was walking forward. And when you start truly walking forward, you don't look back. That night, I sat in the study and pulled out a photo album. I found a picture of me and my daughter, Clara, on the day she graduated from law school. We were standing on the campus lawn, our arms linked, both of us beaming with pride. I was holding a bouquet of freesias, her favorite. I stared at the woman in the photograph, the woman who had raised a strong, brilliant daughter, the woman who had once had a life filled with her own light. Then I stood up, went to the closet, and began to pack. Not with anger, not with spite, but with the quiet, resolute purpose of a person who had finally understood. I had to leave the place that had rendered me invisible. I had to go to Clara. I had to ask her if, at 60, it was too late to begin again. The next morning, I booked a flight to Denver. The moment I stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, I saw her. Clara was waiting just beyond the security gate, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression a mixture of concern and love. The instant our eyes met, she rushed forward and wrapped me in an embrace so tight it nearly took my breath away. And in the circle of her arms, I felt it, a profound, unconditional love that had nothing to do with my utility. She loved me for being me. You look exhausted, Mom, she said softly, her hand on my cheek. I haven't been sleeping well, I admitted, my voice hoarse. She didn't press. She simply took my suitcase and led me to her car. The drive to her suburban home was quiet, a comfortable silence that allowed me to just be. Her house was a small, charming bungalow with a porch swing and a garden filled with late-blooming roses. A small, hand-painted sign on the door read, "Welcome." As I stood on the doormat, I felt the prickle of tears. "Come in, Mom," Clara said gently. I made your favorite, roasted tomato soup. The kitchen was bright and smelled of basil and warm bread. She had already set the table. I sat down, and she placed a steaming bowl in front of me before taking the seat opposite. Then, with the calm, measured tone of a lawyer and the deep empathy of a daughter, she said, Okay. Tell me everything. And I did. The soup grew cold as I recounted the whole sordid story, my voice breaking at times. Clara listened without interruption, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as I spoke. When I finished, she set down her spoon, her eyes clear and resolute. He didn't just disrespect you, Mom, she said, her voice laced with a cold, quiet anger. He committed a profound violation of your trust, your dignity, and your labor. For 20 years. But I let him, I whispered. I enabled it. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You acted out of love and a sense of duty. That's not a weakness. But now you get to act for yourself. It's time to make a different choice. Can I still do that? I asked, the question hanging in the air. I'm 60 years old. Clara smiled, a steady, confident smile that reached her eyes. Of course you can. You have wisdom, you have savings, you have me. And most importantly, you have your life ahead of you. You're not at the end of your story, Mom. You're at the beginning of a new chapter. Her expression grew serious. We need to get you a lawyer. A good one. Back in Cedar Creek. We're not going to wage a war, but you're going to claim what is rightfully yours. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. The house, the appreciation on his assets during your marriage, your caregiving has value. The law recognizes that. I don't even know where to start, I confessed, feeling overwhelmed. You start, she said, her hand squeezing mine, by understanding that you don't have to endure this anymore. You've already taken the hardest step, Mom. You got on that plane. The rest is just logistics. That night, I slept in her guest room. Through the window, the branches of a great maple tree stretched toward the sky. I lay in bed, the quiet hum of the house a comforting presence. Before I fell asleep, I found an old journal in my bag. The first entry, written nearly 20 years ago, read, Year 1 with Arthur. He brought me a wild rose from the garden. We are building a life. I stared at the faded ink, then slowly, deliberately, I tore the page from the book. Not with anger, but with acceptance. Not every memory is worth keeping. When I returned to Cedar Creek a few days later, I didn't unpack. Instead, I sat at Arthur's imposing mahogany desk, opened my laptop, and typed a phrase I had never considered before: divorce rights for long-term homemakers. The words felt foreign, clinical, but they were a lifeline. Following Clara's advice, I spent the day researching local law firms. I found one that specialized in family law for women over 50, Riverbend Legal Counsel. I filled out their online consultation form, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and liberation. They responded within hours, scheduling a phone call. I also started looking for part-time work. My library science degree was decades old, but my skills in editing and organization were sharp. I found a remote position proofreading articles for a small online journal. The pay was modest, but the first paycheck that landed in my personal bank account, money that was mine and mine alone, felt like the first breath of fresh air after years in a stuffy room. One afternoon, while sorting through some old boxes, I found a photograph of myself from a solo trip I'd taken to the coast before I met Arthur. I was standing on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the wind whipping through my hair, a genuine, unself-conscious smile on my face. I remembered that woman. She loved photography. She volunteered at the local animal shelter. She took pottery classes. She had a life that was rich and full, a life that belonged entirely to her. I held the photograph, a tangible piece of the person I had misplaced. Then Arthur shattered the quiet. Leo's coming for dinner tonight, he announced from the doorway of the study. I looked up, startled. He was just here. So what? Arthur said, his tone dripping with the old entitlement. It's his home. He's bringing his girlfriend. Make something nice. I didn't argue. I simply went to the kitchen. But this time, I didn't reach for the fresh vegetables or the special ingredients I kept for them. I pulled 2 frozen lasagnas from the freezer and tossed a simple bagged salad into a bowl. I was done performing. My energy was a finite resource, and I would no longer spend it on those who saw it as their due. When they arrived, I was already at the dining table, working on an article. Leo's girlfriend, a young woman with a bored expression, sniffed the air. Is that frozen lasagna? Leo, you told me his wife was a gourmet cook. Leo peered at the table. This is it? Seriously? You know Dad's supposed to be on a low-sodium diet, right? I finally looked up from my laptop, my gaze cool and direct. If you don't care for the meal, the door is right there. I'm sure there's a pizza place open. Arthur, flustered, tried to intervene. Alara, he didn't mean it like that. There's no need to be so hostile. I set my laptop aside and looked him straight in the eye. And there's no need to be so rude. Your son is a grown man. He can learn some manners. Leo let out a derisive snort. See? This is what I'm talking about, Dad. This attitude. No wonder you didn't put her in the will. 20 years and she gets nothing. Can you believe that? He said to his girlfriend, who gasped with theatrical shock. Then what's she even here for? The girl asked. Good question, Leo sneered. A sense of accomplishment for playing nurse to an old man? I stood up slowly, every muscle in my body calm and steady. My voice, when I spoke, was as cold and clear as ice. What I was here for, I said, my words dropping one by one into the stunned silence, was a partnership I mistakenly believed existed. I was here because, at the time, I didn't see your father for the coward he is, hiding behind a mask of civility. I turned my gaze to Arthur, whose face had gone pale. Everything I did for you, I did because I thought you were worthy of my care. My respect. My love. I was wrong. Then I looked at Leo. And I don't need you to tell me I'm not your mother. I never wanted to be. But I am a person who understands the meaning of gratitude and decency, concepts you have yet to grasp. I let my eyes sweep over the 3 of them one last time. This is the last meal you will ever eat in this house prepared by my hands. As of tonight, we are separated. I am filing for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch. Arthur shot to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of fury and panic. Alara, you can't. I can, I cut him off, my voice unwavering. And I will. This isn't an emotional outburst, Arthur. It's a decision. The most clear-headed one I've made in 20 years. I turned, walked into the bedroom, and gently closed the door. On the back of the door, I taped the confirmation email from Riverbend Legal Counsel. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of independence. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking back toward myself. The morning I left, the air was still and gray, the sky over Cedar Creek a blanket of soft, pearlescent light. I had packed only 2 suitcases. Isabel arrived in her sturdy pickup truck, her presence a silent, solid reassurance. She said nothing, just lifted a box of books and carried it to the truck with a small, knowing smile. Arthur stood in the doorway of the kitchen, his arms crossed, a look of disbelief warring with mockery on his face. He didn't say a word. He likely thought it was a dramatic gesture, a bluff, that I would falter and turn back. He didn't try to stop me. That silence was his oldest weapon, control through indifference. He believed his withholding of emotion was a sign of strength. He had miscalculated. Before I closed the front door for the last time, I turned to him. If you need someone to cook your meals from now on, Arthur, I said, my voice quiet but firm, I suggest you offer them a salary. The door clicked shut behind me. There were no tears, no surge of last-minute regret. Only a profound, liberating calm. Isabel's upstairs apartment was small, but it was filled with light. A large window faced west, overlooking the garden behind the studio where late-season sunflowers stood like sentinels. I sat on the edge of the simple bed, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. No one needed anything from me. There were no schedules to keep, no delicate egos to manage. There was only me, and the quiet, spacious possibility of the rest of my life. That evening, I cooked a meal for myself. A simple piece of salmon with roasted asparagus and a glass of crisp Sauvignon Blanc. As I ate alone at the small wooden table, listening to an old jazz record Isabel had left for me, I felt not loneliness, but a deep and satisfying solitude. I had expected an explosion from Arthur. Instead, a few days later, I received 2 terse text messages. "How long do you intend to drag this out? And then, you're going to regret this." I deleted them without replying. As Isabel said, if he felt true remorse, he would know how to apologize. Demands are not apologies. My lawyer, a sharp, compassionate woman named Anya Davies, moved swiftly. She filed for a temporary order to freeze their joint assets and formally requested a full financial disclosure from Arthur, dating back 10 years. I knew this would infuriate him. For a man like Arthur, money was intertwined with identity. To have it scrutinized was the ultimate humiliation. The legal battle was ugly but brief. Arthur resisted, and Leo appeared at the studio one afternoon, his face contorted with rage. "Are you trying to bankrupt him?" he shouted at me from the doorway. "You were never one of us. You're a parasite, Alara." Isabel stepped between us, her 5'3" frame as immovable as a mountain. "You will leave now," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "or I will call the police." He spat a final insult and stormed away. The disclosure process revealed what Anya had suspected. In the last year, Arthur had quietly transferred a significant sum of money into a trust solely in Leo's name, a clear attempt to hide marital assets. The judge was not amused. The day of the final hearing, Clara flew in to be with me. She sat beside me in the polished, intimidating courtroom, her presence a silent anchor. When the judge read the ruling, the words seemed to echo in the cavernous space. I was awarded a settlement of $400,000, representing my share of the marital assets, plus 2 years of spousal support at $2,800 a month. I felt no thrill of victory, no satisfying sting of revenge. I felt only a quiet, somber sense of justice. It wasn't a windfall. It was back pay. It was compensation for 20 years of unpaid labor, emotional neglect, and the slow, steady erosion of my spirit. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, an official-looking letter arrived. It was from the hospital. Arthur had been admitted to the ICU following a massive stroke. The letter stated that there was no one listed as his next of kin willing to sign the forms for his long-term care. I sat with the letter in my hands, the world outside my window continuing on oblivious. The verdict, the loss of control, must have been the final blow. For a man like Arthur, image and power were his lifeblood. I did not go to the hospital. I did not call. I forwarded the letter to Anya, who legally transferred all medical power of attorney to Leo. Anya called me back a few days later. "He's refusing to sign," she said. He told the hospital social worker that his father's care is too expensive and that he can't be burdened. He got what he always wanted. He gave everything to his son. And in the end, his son treated him with the same transactional cruelty he had modeled for him his entire life. He was alone, not because I had abandoned him, but because he had built a life on a foundation of use, and he had finally outlived his usefulness to the one person he valued. Standing on the precipice of his life's tragic conclusion, I felt no pity, no grief. Only the unshakable clarity that walking away had been the single most profound act of self-love I had ever committed. Early summer sunlight now streams through the windows of my apartment, illuminating the words on my laptop screen. The title of my latest blog post reads, "From Being Needed to Being Seen." It took me a week to write, not because the words were hard to find, but because I was discovering how much I had to say. I have a small but loyal readership now, women who leave comments like, "Your story gave me the courage to find my own," and "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to bloom." I work as a freelance editor, my days structured by my own deadlines and desires. The apartment above the studio is no longer a temporary refuge, it is my home. On the wall, a piece of driftwood I found on the beach hangs, with a single word burned into it, Alara. Clara visited last weekend. She brought a small, framed print for my desk. It was a quote by a poet I love, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Have you heard anything about him?" she asked gently. "Isabel mentioned he's in a state-run nursing facility now," I said, my voice even. "Leo visits once a month, to ensure the checks are still clearing. I shook my head, not in sadness, but in finality. That world, Clara, it's no longer mine to worry about. She smiled, a look of immense pride on her face. I know, Mom. I just wanted to be sure. After she left, I went downstairs to the garden. Isabel was tending to a new bed of roses, their petals the color of a sunrise. She had named the variety Resilience. I picked up a small watering can and began to tend to a patch of herbs I had planted myself: rosemary, thyme, and mint. The scent was clean, vibrant, and alive. As twilight began to fall, the string lights Isabel had hung over the patio flickered on, casting a warm, inviting glow. I stood there amidst the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers and felt a quiet, profound sense of gratitude. I was not defined by my past, by a marriage that had tried to erase me, or by the family that never was. I was standing in the doorway of my own life, a life I was building with my own two hands, piece by piece. I was no longer the invisible woman. I was Alara. And for the first time in a very long time, that was more than enough. It was everything.